Welcome to my conversation with Donna Kaplan. Donna Kaplan was my teacher back in the 90s when I took a workshop at the Dallas Handweavers and Spinners Guild, a 3-day workshop to learn how to weave with wire. That experience impacted me instantly and profoundly. And 30 years later, I had the honor to talk to her not only about the body of her work, but also to dig a little bit deeper about weaving with wire. This video is brought to you by Christine Miller and her online studio, christinekmillercourses.com, where you can sign up for self-paced courses or 3-day Zoom workshops to learn how to weave with wire. And as a part of being one of my students, I have a monthly Zoom Wire Weaver Hangout. So this episode is sponsored by our Wire Weaver Hangout, the month of October 2023. Let's listen to this really juicy conversation with me and Donna. Welcome to the October Wire Weaver Hangout. This is an incredibly sweet reunion for me to have my teacher, Donna Kaplan, as our guest. And she is going to be talking about her work. Donna, why don't you just give a little brief introduction of yourself to my students and let them know. I'm always talking about you, just so you know, but why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Where do you want me to start? Birth or where?
Well, why don't you just start a little bit about the wire?
Okay. I started weaving with I started weaving when I was 9 years old. And of course, we all have careers and second careers and third careers and children. But all the time I was weaving with wire and other materials. I was always interested in them. And so about 25, 30, well, it's probably been 30 years ago, I started weaving with wire. 80s. Is that 30? No, more like 40. Yeah, time's going away.
It does.
Yes, so I started weaving with wire, and there just seemed to be so much to discover. And I started with small objects first, with jewelry, and they just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So they're now mostly sculptures, but occasionally I make a foray back into to jewelry. And I'm currently attempting to weave with weave 0.8 on a 40 shaft loom and a 24 shaft a Compudabi loom. And so I've been taking classes to get more proficient, and I need to still be more proficient. But I hope to continue my foray into weaving with wire with a 40 shaft loom. We'll see.
Wow. I am excited to see that.
So am I.
I have one question for you. I'm wondering if you were inspired or crossed paths with the likes of Arlene Fish or Mary Lee Hugh, who were pioneers using wire with fiber techniques back in the mid 20th century.
Well, Mary Lee Hugh is a University of Washington instructor, or was, in the jewelry department, the art department. And she's taught classes here in the Northwest. She's very generous with her time and her thoughts. And Arlene Fish has been in some of my classes at times, and I have been in her classes, sharing information back and forth together. And I think once upon a time, I wrote a book review for one of the magazines, the weaving journals, about her book. And she has some of my work in her book. But she was a real pioneer in the concept.
She was. And for those of you, if you don't have Arlene Fish's book, which is, now I can never get the title right, but it's basically working with metal using fiber techniques ish. And it's really a Bible for, using metal in those kinds of ways. Because I also had a workshop with Arlene came to Dallas, and then I also took a workshop with Mary Lee when she came to Dallas. And so the history of the artists using wire, it goes back, and I just find it to be really exciting and valuable, and I feel like a little standard bearer. It's like I want to keep it going into the 21st century because there's still no end to the excitement about it.
At one time, I thought that wire was not going to be available because of what I use is surplus magnet wire from old engines that's surplus. And fiber optic cable was taking over from a lot of that for usage. So magnetic wire was no longer being made for those particular products. So at one time, I didn't think there was going to be any wire to weave with, but that's not happened. That's certainly, it's more available than ever. Someone asked a question, what is magnetic wire? Magnetic, the original wire that was used was wound on motors and makes a connection. And it was it had to be a wire in order to make the connection from one wire to the other. So electrical wire, all kinds of industrial wire was magnetic. It was called magnetic wire, generally copper. And it was usually coated with some sort of coating to protect the wire from erosion.
What I did do, Donna, with your permission, is I kind of grouped these in my mind of sort of how they relate to each other. And so this first group is pleated. And why don't you talk about how you constructed and thought this piece through?
Well, it's constructed of several pieces. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 actual weave woven pieces that then are pleated, folded and pleated. So the center where the arches fold up is the center of the woven piece. And then the divides are where they're sewn together. And then they're shaped. Well, they're shaped before I put them together and then adjusted after putting together.
It's a beautiful flowing piece. And then this piece also was multiple strips of woven metal.
There's a base underneath, and then those are all woven pieces that are sewn to the piece. And then the fan at the top was a third warp. So there were 3 warps to get this piece done. And I miscalculated and I had to rewarp the loom for the pleats.
Didn't you say there was a base underneath these?
That's correct. So that was the third warp. There was the base, then the pleats, and then the top fan. There were 3 warps.
And, I sew everything together with wire. How did you attach these things when you were making them?
With wire and number 69 nylon carpet thread. I use both.
Interesting.
The copper wire gets work hardened, and in very difficult places where you need a lot of reinforcement, it's just very hard to keep it from breaking. So the nylon is very, very strong and doesn't break and doesn't abrade. It's made for making carpets.
I'm going to have to investigate that. So here's another pleated piece. You can see inside that was copper wire. And tell them, when we had our little chat last week, that you said copper wire was all you could really get for a while, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how did you get the color on the surface of these pleats?
Well, I use silk and rayon and linen with wire. So the warp is set at 60 EPI, and then it's woven flat, and the color is across the warp, and then it's pleated and shaped after it comes off the loom. And the color is primarily in that piece from the rayon and silk that I used. But it's also has some colored wire in it, but not a lot. Top rim is a colored wire.
Oh, this red. Because you actually could get red magnet wire and green, oddly
And
enough.
green. Yeah.
Like Christmas green, you know, something that is hard to work with, that green wire. This is another piece that is so elegant, and you look like you have a twill structure in this.
I almost always use twill and more fiber on one side and more metal on the other side. It's a stable construction, so you are able to make things that stand up on their own. It's about 90% metal and 10% fiber.
Wow. It certainly doesn't appear that way when I teach my students, and I teach them as you taught me, and start them with 60 EPI. And they ask, it's like, why are we starting with this? And I said, because if I didn't have you start with 60 EPI, you would never do it. You need to feel the strength of that and how it really creates a very robust material, having that wire so densely packed in. Here's another variation. I really love how, and you'll see throughout these images that you would take your idea and then you would go back to it and approach it from a different angle, kind of exploring what else you could do with that. I think there's a lot of juice in doing that. So how did you get this rim so beautifully rounded at the top?
With my hands. Again, woven flat and then pleated, and it's just rounded underneath. And it wasn't easy, but it worked.
Well, it's really beautiful. I think you and I talked about last week, when you work with this material, absolute perfection is a little elusive.
Certainly is.
It has an ish quality to it. And when you start down the road and you're trying to get a certain line or shape, sometimes it wants to be what it wants to be a little bit, right?
That's correct.
But that is really beautiful. And just for everyone in the meeting tonight, each one of these pieces has a round base at the bottom, which we're not going to really see in these slides. But I am curious how you got your round base shape.
Well, not all of them are round. Some of the pieces they're odd shaped, but I used cardboard, heavy cardboard, and I used that as my shape. And then I wove the material to match that. And then I would put an inner piece in and an outer piece, so the cardboard would be sandwiched in between.
And then your cut wires, if you didn't have a selvage, they would go like into the middle of that sandwich.
Correct.
Yeah, well, that's a really good idea. This is another pleated piece. I'm not quite sure what's going on back here, but this you kind of reversed. You brought the copper out as your pleat. Put the color back into the.
You might have another picture of that has the stained glass in it. Or the decor.
Oh, I do. Yeah, we're going to get to that. I did not put those two things together, but we're going to see it here in a minute. I have to say, this is one of my favorites of yours. And I think it's just the color is so rich and beautiful, but I always wondered how you got that color. So the warp is going vertically.
Correct.
Right. And these are panels. And then your weft material, you just gradated that material.
Correct.
As you went up. I guess, this is where when you're weaving, because, you have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 panels. So you probably had to keep some pretty good notes about where you stopped and started one gradation.
I had a long piece of cardboard where I had put the gradations on so that I could see on the loom where I was as far as color goes. So they're not all perfect, but I wasn't shooting for perfection.
Yeah, perfection is not always cracked up to what it sounds like. This is another pleated piece, and the color change in this is just so lovely. But this looks like this is, the warp is going across. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. The warp is going, no, up the piece.
Up the piece.
Yeah.
And then you did the same gradation
Uh-huh.
with the fiber. Well, tell me about this piece.
It was inspired by a flower, and it's sort of it's an odd picture because it's three-dimensional. There are parts to it, and inside of it there's a garden growing. It was an attempt to get the garden, but I don't think it shows. It's in a collection in New Mexico, in Santa Fe. No, Taos.
It's perfect for New Mexico. And then this is, I think, the last of the pleated series. Did you tell me that you stitched all this after you wove it on your sewing machine?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's crazy. I just have to say, I've never tried sewing the woven metal on my sewing machine. I would assume I would use a heavy needle, like a leather needle or a denim needle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you would have to go really slow and methodically.
Oh, yes.
But the wire, doesn't it just want to break your needles?
Yes. It's a lot of needles. Got to make sure you've got them if you've got a deadline.
Listen, the control you have in this piece is really amazing to me, Donna. After you finished this, did you ever think you would go back to doing it this way? Or was it a kind of a one and done? Like, oh, I'm glad I got through that. And now.
Well, I was very much a novice in embroidery with the machine on metal. So there were a lot of challenges and I wanted to learn more. So I did go to school. It's a fiber school up in La Conner, which is a town about 2 hours north of here, and took courses. And the actual program lasts about 10 years if you go through the whole program. It took about 3 years worth learning how to do it the right way, to freehand embroidery, but I haven't used it very much. Inspiration hasn't struck yet.
Yes, this is pleated, but we're going to see throughout some of these your use of beads in your woven metal, which is something I've done a little bit of. I haven't done a lot of actually weaving the beads into the fabric. And the top of this piece is just spectacular. So what got you interested in bringing beads into the woven metal fabric?
I like glittery things. I just thought they went well together. The top is done with sprang, not woven. There's another potential for fiber is in metal in sprang.
Yes, and you have quite a few instances in your work where you've incorporated sprang. We're going to see
I have.
In your Mosaic series, which we're going to get to in a minute. This was a color and weave structure, wasn't it, when you wove this on your loom?
Yep.
So does the warp goes sideways?
Correct. And it was done in panels.
And done in panels and
shape.
sort of using blocks to get that color and weave.
It was done on 4 shafts, and it's a 3-1 twill shaped on the loom as I was weaving it.
Wow.
And then sewn together.
That is really amazing. That is.
And the top separate piece.
And then I had to throw this wonderful beaded piece in. Tell them about these. This center panel is added to the woven metal, right?
Well, it's a separate panel, but all the other beads are woven into the structure. Called Celebration because those are molly beads primarily, and molly beads are used for weddings. So everybody brings their strand and the bride wears them for the day. So it's a community celebration, very valuable to the community and the women who.
It's beautiful. I've got a friend that has quite a lot of Molly beads herself, and they're spectacular. I
Mhm.
can just imagine this piece, just knowing about her beads. But when you weave in this part, you kind of have the beads, are they on a separate bobbin, or are they on?
They're on the shuttle. I have two shuttles usually, so that there's one shuttle that has the beads on and the other one that has the other material I'm using. This one was
Yeah.
done with linen, 16-1 linen, I believe. So it doesn't have the sheen that the others do. And the top part is again sprang.
You are really getting me interested in exploring spraying, for sure, with wire.
That's my job,
You're doing a great job.
getting people obsessed.
Yes, yes. And this is, oh my gosh, this is completely beaded. So I guess it's also a two shuttle where you have a ground weft, and then those beads are just sitting on top of that ground weft.
No, there was no ground. It's all beads.
Wow.
And well, actually, I take that back. There is a wire in there. The beads are strung on wire. And so it's a tapestry. It's essentially a tapestry woven with beads on metal, and it's shaped on the loom as it's being woven. So there's 4 panels, which I sewed together.
It's amazing. And for those, I know when and I'm assuming these are seed beads. And
Size
when
11.
Yeah, and when you buy a hank of seed beads, they usually come 10 strands per hank, or 12, whatever. If you take one thread out and lay it on a table and have your wire at one end, you can actually just thread the wire through the bead while it's still on the thread, and then you just move those beads onto the wire. It is so fast. You're not having to pick up every single bead. Now, if you're working with beads that aren't in a hank, then you're going to have to pick up every single bead. But
I have a bead spinner. Do you know what that is?
I do. I'm not sure I ever felt like it was tremendously better. Do you think it really was a lot better to use the bead spinner?
None of these pieces would have been done without them.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Well,
wasn't working with hanks. Mostly I worked with beads in containers.
oh, okay. Well, I've mostly worked with hanks, and that has been good. And then this is another piece. This silver wire is very glittery. This, you can't, Donna and I were talking about how challenging it is to really photograph woven metal sculpture, or any woven metal. It's hard to catch the reflectivity, and there's just a lot of depth to the material that the light just sort of gets sucked into it. Tell us about this piece that you have all this beaded wonderment on the front.
It's a pleated piece, and it's 24 gauge rather than 28 gauge because I wanted to make it more substantial. And so it's heavier than the usual 28 gauge or 26 gauge wire. I also use linen with it. And as you can see, I've shaded it as I went. And then the beads were added separately. And it's a panel done in 10-2 cotton with the beads. And I use a rug technique to make the beads a pile.
Yeah, just getting caught by a warp thread and making loops with the beads. That's wonderful. Now we're going to get into your Mosaic series. This is another place you use spraying. So tell us, what was your inspiration for kind of going in this direction?
Well, the first time I encountered using wire, that I actually considered using wire, was a mentor I had who was a spraying expert. She actually wrote one of the books on spraying in the 70s, Hella Skoronsky. She was 83 at the time, and she was teaching me how to spraying. And she had one piece she had experimented with in spraying, And so I started using spraying in jewelry first before I started weaving with it. So it's always been there in my bag of trick to use, and it comes out when I need it. So these pieces are woven with wire and linen, 16-1 linen. And then I use dichroic glass in a mosaic pattern. And then I cover the glass with the sprang in wire and sew the sprang to the background, and that keeps the pieces from moving.
So they're actually, you've got stitches in between
Correct.
the mosaic tesserae to
Mhm.
anchor that sprang down.
And anchor the glass down. So it doesn't
Right.
move around.
Yes. It's very, very interesting. And this is something you were really you did a series of these.
I did. And that one is all different colors on each side. Again, it's sprang, I woven, and the panels on the sides are pleated, and the center panels are not pleated. Each side is a different color emphasis. So if you turned it around, it's red on one side, blue on another, etc.
Wow. Did you have a source for your glass?
There's a place called Pacific Northwest Glass here in our area, but also Bullseye Glass in Portland, which is probably the best resource for glass in the United States.
Oh, okay. And this
And
was the piece that we talked about
yeah,
earlier.
so that's the mosaic glass up the front of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't make that connection. This is really beautiful and elegant. You're so playful with color. You know, color is really important to me, but I really enjoy how you too love color.
This one was a challenge, and I used 4 threads of very, very fine rayon. It's almost less than sewing thread. And so I changed the color all the way around as I was making it. But the color was so subtle, you can't even see the differences. And that was a good learning experience. You can be too subtle, and you can't see all that work you put into it.
Mm-hmm. But when you look at it like now, I think you do see that, I mean, my gosh, you're going from such a light value here to a very dark value. So you understand that that is just gradating as you go.
Well, actually, it's woven. If you tip it on its side, that was the way it was woven. So what you're seeing is not the color gradation, but the way the wire and the fiber together hit the light. So that's not the gradation. The gradation was actually blue to a green and then back to blue again, which you can't see because the back had the green. So that's just what wire does. That's why wire is so wonderful, because it creates its own color and you never quite know how it's going to work.
Of course, I think that, is just the way it is with weaving in general. If you're working with two materials you've never used before, you do not know what's going to happen until you weave them together. There's just always that magic that is at play. I really marvel in how your investigation led you into a lot of different surface design techniques. So tell us about this particular piece.
Again, you would tip it on its side because it's woven across horizontally, and I'm using old fabric. So I cut out old fabric and I make strips out of it, and I paint it with gesso, just as if you were painting a picture. Well, at first I do that, and then I cut it into strips. It's wonderful to work with because it's much more responsive than just wire. It's easy to work with. You have to just make sure you've got enough layers of paint on it. And I generally do it on the bias. And I can't tell you that the color is different being straight or on a bias, but it seems to me that it is. So I think the reflection is different on a bias cut fabric, even though it is very thick with paint on both sides. I did a whole series that way.
It's really provocative. And, my head starts spinning. I think about, if you wove with canvas strips and that were painted, or if you wove with felt, some handmade felt.
I've done a little bit of that, but I never finished a piece, just tried it out.
I really love this piece a lot. And then this piece is, which way is the warp? Is it horizontal?
Tip it sideways.
Okay. And that's the warp.
It was red wire and black and white linen.
A lot of your fabrics, they become very weft faced, right?
Well, again, I'm using usually an 8-shaft loom, and I designate 2 of the shafts for the selvage. So I have 6 shafts left. So I'm using a 1-5-12. So generally the outside is the fiber side and the inside is the metal side. Not always, sometimes I change that.
Well, this one is really handsome.
There's always wire in the weft and the warp. So though you're seeing white and black, there is wire in there. So there's a silver wire and a black wire along with the 16-1 linen. Otherwise, the structure wouldn't be strong enough.
All of those things are choices. You can have a fiber warp and wire weft. You can have a wire warp and fiber weft. And that will just create a different kind of fabric that maybe you want to be more flowing and have more soft undulation, but you lose the strength if you don't have the wire going in both directions. So you do have to plan and make a decision about what you want your final fabric to be. So I'm assuming that this is another one of those weaving with fabric
on the inside, and the outside is spraying with beads.
Oh, so this is actually two. Did you weave it and form it and then do the spraying around the formed vessels?
No, I did the spraying first and then I added the inside. It was a series about canyons in New Mexico. So they were looking into canyons. They were based on photographs I had taken. And it doesn't show the detail. There's a lot of detail in that piece on the inside, but you really can't see it until you're standing right next to it.
Yeah. I love that about your work, that there's like this really surprise element to your pieces. And this piece, tell us about, of course, this is about 9/11.
Right. I was struck by 9/11, and we were all responding in our area, what we can do, how can we express our feelings about it. And this was my version. And it's about 32, 34 inches tall, maybe a little further, based on a body form. And I used all my scraps because there were so many people involved in this, and it felt like, and the chaos seemed to indicate to me scraps. And I took all the scraps and I machine embroidered on them statistics from the newspapers. So all over it, there are different bits and pieces about statistics from the newspaper. They were so graphic to me. I didn't see how I could say it any more than the newspapers were saying. Such a loss of life, such a loss of people and buildings and community. And inside, as I was sewing it, and it's very challenging to sew on, and I had a lot of broken thread. The thread on the bobbin was nylon, and so as it breaks a lot, especially on wire, but as I was making it, I would leave the threads, and on the inside, all the threads represent the people falling off of the buildings. So you can't see it, but it's in there.
Wow. And just to make it clear to our viewers here, all of this is woven metal scrap. Like when I first saw it, I
Yeah.
thought I could see some of it had wire, but I thought maybe it was just hand woven fabrics, but it's
No.
all woven metal.
Yep, because it stands on its own. It doesn't have a base to it.
Oh my gosh, there's no armature for it.
No, I did another one, and the second one I did an armature, but this one did not have an armature.
Yeah, I have another view of this one, a little side view that is it's really remarkable, powerful piece. And
It's in a private collection in California.
I think art that, conveys a strong message, a strong idea is some of the most exciting art, because we have an entry point into the story of it. So
Mhm.
that's amazing. And then this is
The lone carrot.
the lone carrot right here in the middle.
Yep, the only thing left in my garden. So I made a shrine to it. So the piece in the middle is dichroic glass on top of other dichroic glass with leather and sprang, holding it in place. And then the outside is just color and linen. And then the outside rim is another piece of woven wire. And then the pieces that kind of hold everything together also woven. So that was 3 warps and a sprang. Back there's another rim which holds the piece, a basket.
Yeah, I've got another viewpoint to show, but before I go there, are you a mathematician, Donna?
Worst subject I ever had.
Well, because I'm just thinking about, I've done a little bit of construction to know that when you want to bring basically a rectilinear material into a circle, your outer edge has to be long enough to
I
to
do a lot of paper mock-ups of things to figure out how to do it.
okay.
This isn't the beginning, that's the end.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I do talk about using paper to approximate how much material you're going to need. It's never a direct correlation because the woven metal has more thickness to it, but it is a good way to get a basic idea of how it's going to go. And this is the side view of it. So glittery. This is a great photograph because you really see the shine of the wire. I love this detail that you use in several of your pieces where you have this little detail on your rim just to give it a little more interest.
Well, when you're putting wire on something like a rim, it will only bend so far if you're not pleating it. So you cannot use just one piece to go around the rim. You've got to use components. So where those pieces come together, that's what it's covering up.
Okay, I get that. That's a good thing to know, how to use the material to
Hex the rim if it happened to be sitting in a particular way.
This is beaded sprang
Correct.
with wire. Are the beads on wire?
All the beads are all strung on wire, 11 gauge primarily. And the piece is called Waiting for the Birds because in January in the state of Washington, all you have is rain, 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 snow, rain, mud. And I'm always waiting for this first bird to come. So that's why the piece is called Waiting for the Birds. In sprang, if you'll notice the back panel, there's a swirly area in the middle, a swirly kind of area. Sprang has 2 surfaces. Whatever you do at the bottom also happens at the top. And so you always have a come together place in all sprang. So in wire, it's very handy because you don't need to put something in there to keep it from all coming out again. The wire holds the surface together. So that's why on any sprang piece, you always see a middle, unless it's been cut apart. And the piece going up the back is also spranged, and you can see that the center is a little thicker, and that's also because that was spranged and the center piece is heavier. And in the bottom is a woven piece. It's another woven garden.
And did you, when you're doing spraying, well, it looks like these beads were put on the wall. Some are attached after you finished the sculpture.
No, they were mostly done as I was doing the sculpture, because I wasn't sure how well the wire would hold things together, because I had to figure out how to get the birds and everything into the structure of the piece. So they're actually on the wire, the spring. So it took a lot of designing and planning before I could do this. The only bird I think is actually attached is the one at the very top.
This little guy up here.
Because I didn't want wires sticking out all over the place on the inside, trying to hold it together.
There's the inside. I'm so happy we got to see the inside of one of your pieces.
Yeah, all my pieces have something on the inside. Often it's dichroic glass or some statement. I put sculptures down there, little tiny sculptures. Sometimes you can't even see them because when I enclose it, it doesn't show up, but I know it's there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And this is some of your new work. I took what you sent me.
It's just a working photo, so I apologize.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. We're happy to see that. But tell them about what you're doing here.
Well, it's several pieces of woven wire with fiber and thread, and it's a very fine metallic thread I'm using because the scale I'm working on. Altogether, there's 6 pieces of woven wire, which I have shaped to make the frame. And then the background is also a flat piece of wire. And then the dichroic glass goes into that. And I use sprang to sew it together. So it's a pin, and it comes off of the base and is a pin about 2 inches long, 2.5 inches long. So it can be worn as a pin or it can be on the wall.
I love that. I love that.
And the hardest part wasn't the weaving. It was trying to figure out how to attach it and take it off.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure. So that you could do it more than once as well and take it off. Well, so beautiful. I know that there have been some questions in the chat, and if I have you on mute, you can unmute yourself. I think we've answered some of this. Is the color on the outside the silk, or is it the wire? The pieces are magnificent. And then someone says, are the pleats manipulated by hand?
And I use pliers occasionally, but usually it's hands, and you can tell how many deadlines I'm on by the number of Band-Aids I'm wearing.
Well, that's interesting, because I have said that the only time I really get injured is when I'm sewing things together with wire and I stick myself with the needle.
Yeah.
But so someone asked, what is the widest warp that you have put on?
About 4 feet. And it was terrible. I will never do it again.
48 inches wide. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
The problem is the wire, and it was, I can't remember the set now. I kept changing the set because it's very hard to beat the wire, even if you have a heavy beater. So the wider you go, the harder it is to beat it into place.
Yeah.
So if you, that's the issue for me.
Well, that's really good to know. I feel like a baby, Donna. I've only gone 12 inches wide. And
don't go any further.
Well, okay. Well, that's actually a pretty good piece of advice. I might go to 24, and test it. But
If you do, I'd strongly recommend putting weights on your beater.
oh,
So like the rug weights that go on the bottom of the beater,
uh-huh,
and using those, it will help tremendously.
uh-huh. There's a fine line though about beating the wire. One of the workshops I taught a few years ago, the participant, everything just snapped right kind of in the front of the fell of her fabric. And and I just said, well, you just beat the tar out of it, I mean, you beat it so strongly that the wire just snapped. It's strong, but it's also delicate.
I was concerned about that with that particular one. I did very wide. So I used 24 gauge every few inches, thinking that would help. But it also caused problems with the beat. So yes, that is an issue.
Yeah. You have to test it, but it is always be prepared for whatever's going to happen.
Was that a problem with the beat because of the set with the 24 gauge?
No, it's just the nature of wire. When you lift the wire and lay it down again on the next shed and you beat it, it just doesn't, it wants to bounce back. It doesn't want to do what you want it to do. It has a life of its own. And so you can push it just so far and then you can't push it any further. If I was gonna, I did that with 28 gauge wire, but not all 28 gauge wires are created equal. So if I was gonna do that again, I would do it with I would make sure that it wasn't as heavy of a 28 gauge wire. The other thing with using magnetic wire, all those colors that are on the wire, that's not from the wire, the purchase spools you get, that is from the coating that goes on the wire. Some of those wires, the really beautiful colors, have a silver coating on it, an amalgam. I'm sure it's not 95% silver, so that they can put other color over it. And if you use copper wire and you do not put an amalgam of silver over it, you cannot get those wonderful colors that are available these days. So that creates a heavier wire. It's adding another element of difficulty, challenge to use. And if the wires are not perfectly coated, it can be a real issue. So those are other things that make the wire different sizes. You'll notice usually black is usually thicker than any other wire. Because of the difficulty of creating black on the wire.
Yeah. I have I've had that experience myself, and you just can't assume that it's all going to be exactly the same, and it's just going to have its own little twist of personality going on with it. Someone is asking what a bead spinner is. I'm just gonna, Joanna, you can go look that up online. It's
I have one right here if you want.
Oh, you do? Well, let's see it.
Hold on. I'll be right back. This is a bead spinner. And you set it, well, you put your beads in here, and you have a needle or a wire. And that's the great thing about wire. You don't need a needle. And you just you spin this, and the beads just go right up on your wire.
Yeah.
I can get about a yard every few minutes on this.
That's cool. I will say that Hanks are faster, but you know, it's a great, if you don't have that, can't get the color you want in that.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. You might want a certain thing and you can't get it that way.
Mhm.
So someone's asked if spraying is like netting, which I'm assuming it kind of is. It
I was trying to think of something I have in process here to show it to you, but I don't have anything in process right at the moment. It's the oldest fiber technique known to man. It preceded knitting, weaving, and crocheting. And it's found all over the world, was used in South America. There are bogs in Denmark where there were little baby caps that were completely intact when they were dug out of the bog. There are different ways of doing it around the world. Most people work from the bottom towards the center, but other places work from the center outwards. It can be done on a loom as you're weaving. So you can add it to your weaving as you're actually working. Though I don't do that. I put it on afterwards for what I'm doing. But it's a very, very versatile technique. You can do it as a double weave, a double sprang. It can be circular. Carol James from Canada has written a number of books, and she teaches sprang, and I've heard great things about her classes. The person I learned from was Hella Skoronsky. Her book is out of print, but it was a great exploration of what you could do with sprang. It was pushing the limits of sprang. And Peter Collingwood wrote the Bible on sprang. If you have Peter, sounds like some of you know who Peter Collingwood is.
Oh, yes.
And most guild libraries have sprang, that book from Peter Collingwood. And it was recently, I think somebody republished it a few years. So that is the most thorough and definitive book on sprang.
That's good to know. Another question is, can you talk about beading your weft with so many beads on the wire? I know in my own experience, I never took physics class, but whenever something presents itself to me, I always go, well, this is about physics. I think that silver and red piece that you did that was only beads as your weft is really beautiful. I know when I've done it, I use a twill, and I'll have it's almost like an inlay. I'll have the shuttle with the beads laying on top of the fiber weft, just being tied down by one shaft, so that you don't really see it, but it sits on the top. And that actually has been very successful to me. But how was it when you were doing that red and silver piece with the beads?
Because I was using wire as the weft also, and putting the beads on the thread on the wire, they could work together. I didn't need to have another wire in there. So it's a tapestry technique. Essentially, I wove a tapestry, only I shaped it as I wove it.
So that was my question. I'm trying to imagine like the reed going through and butting up against the beads. So how does that, do you know what I'm saying?
You just beat it as if you were beating
and the beads kind of separate themselves.
Well, there's a trick to it.
This is my question.
Okay. I co-wrote a book with Kathy Dannerbeck many years ago in the 90s, and we used to teach the class on beads as warp and weft. So I did a lot of experimenting with learning how to use beads on the loom. And the thing is, you want the beads to line up with your warp. So you figure out each thread of the warp will be an interval. Then there'll be a warp thread, a bead, a warp thread, a bead, a warp thread, a bead. Okay. So you have to set your warp so that will occur.
You set
Now,
your work based on the size of the bead?
well, it's also the weave structure again, so you can have the twill weave structure, but you can make it in a tapestry technique. Do you understand?
Mhm.
So I'd have one thread, a bead, but underneath I've still got 5 threads going across, so that the wires on that particular piece, even though you don't see it, it looks like it's straight up and down, are all wired because it's a twill under story. So it's just the matter of getting, and you can put 2 beads sometimes. You can get away with that. Not always. It depends on the material and the size of the beads. But it's best to have 1 bead, 1 warp, 1 bead, 1 warp thread. And then it makes a very stable structure.
Got it. Thank you.
And, you know, I will say that when you are sampling, if you sample narrowly, and then you want to take that to a wider application, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to transfer to the wider application.
Particularly in wire.
Yeah.
The same thing about the bead.
Yeah. So, you know, if you really want to go there, you need to put the width on and really, you know, do the sampling and make your notes and have your documentation, because it just doesn't always go across the way you think it might. And that's a physics thing right there.
I figured my pieces averaged about 6 weeks working full time to make 1 piece.
Wow.
So there's a lot of planning before you even get to the work, and a lot of experience behind that. But of course, I never do anything twice. So everything has a new aspect to it, though there's a lot of background and education that's behind. But there's always new things going on too.
Yeah, it's way too boring if you do the same thing over again.
Mhm. Exactly. And if you're working with galleries, they do not want things to be the same. They want it to be one of a kind.
Well, you have
So they'll say, well, could you make it taller, and could you make it in this color, and then it'll be perfect.
I do applaud you because you have been so generous with your information, Donna. I know I'm just always gushing all over you, but you know, you really are a huge inspiration, and I just want to carry the legacy you have forward. Because you have a very different approach than I have. I remember when I first started weaving with wire, and this was before the internet and cell phones and all that, but I think you knew I had like gotten the bug, but I wouldn't show you my work for about 3 years because I just really wanted to have my own voice with it and have my own sort of body of work. And I think that I'm very inspired by your work, and who knows, maybe I'm gonna go down your path a little bit and do some exploration. But I mean, you know, as you know, and I know, and my students know, we can do this forever and we'll never get to the end of it.
That's right.
It's just a very, very exciting medium. So I think we're going to wrap it up. If anybody has a final question, Donna registered for Convergence.
Yep.
And I am teaching weaving with wire at Convergence. If it makes, we'll see. I never count. Everything seems to be a crapshoot. So we'll see if that comes together. But I'm really looking forward to you and I going off and having a little cup of tea somewhere. So seeing each other in person.
Yeah.
But
That will be great.
We will be in touch long before then. And I just want to thank everybody, my students, for showing up. I'm going to kind of edit this into a video and put it up on my YouTube channel. And then I'll send that link to you, Donna, so you can share with your friends, and we will stay in touch.
Definitely. Good luck to
And
all of you.
Thank you,
And
Donna. Thank
experiment.
you.
I'd love to see pictures.
Well, one thing I know you're not on Facebook that much, but if you,
Mm-mm.
okay, all right, then we'll find another way to, I will
Mhm.
send you pictures from time to
Okay.
time.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Bye,
All right.
everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye-bye.
So you can look for my book anywhere places books are sold, Weaving with Wire, Creating Woven Metal Fabric. And if you're interested in learning how to weave with wire, visit my website, ChristineKMillerCourses.com. Join the Wire as Fiber community and take your weaving to the next level.